Anderson puts his abundant technical facility to dazzling use, making work of unresolvable ambiguity and rich multiplicity. He has fashioned a fascinating style to speak not only to his own racial and cultural inheritance, but also to the deeply disturbing and the superficially sweet. So last spring, Gavlak gave Alex his second one-person show there titled Little Black Boy Makes Imperial Porcelains. And I was excited to learn recently from Alex that in addition to this remarkably quick critical and commercial success, he has embarked on his life as an educator and mentor for younger artists at the Geffen Academy in Los Angeles. So thank you for passing on some of your many lessons, Alex, there with us today. So welcome back to Swarthmore via Zoom.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And I wanted to say, I mean, that senior thesis show really only came together because of your curation. So that was as much a part of the work as that was as much a part of the show as the work was. So thank you for that.
Very generous.
You are. So I'll just start with, I'll just jump into the presentation, and you're going to see works from almost the very beginning, you know, not high school, but you'll see the very, I need to, hold on. 1 second. It was supposed to be on at the beginning. You're going to see works from the beginning of my time at Swarthmore, the end of my time at Swarthmore that leads into the work that you're seeing today. And so you'll see a progression from Swarthmore to graduate school to the present. And I'll just walk you through the influences and some of the, are you able to see the screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
We did.
Well, I'm on Zoom all day, every day. I look like I don't know what I'm doing. How's that?
There it is.
Okay, great. Perfect. Okay. So when I was at Swarthmore, I was very focused on making vessels, and I started making vessels in high school because it was sort of the standard of you know, what you do with clay. There was also a real focus on the ability to create perfection, which is something that we don't often see so much in ceramics, especially not in contemporary art in ceramics, because a lot of times, especially in LA, it's this what they refer to as the de-skilled approach. You're just kind of you're squeezing clay out. You're making these kind of coarsely rendered forms. But I've always been drawn to the classical aesthetics that the ceramic tradition has always participated in, and ultimately invites by just through the process of making. So vessels were kind of the initial kind of access point for ceramics for me. And from there, I started to use the vessel as for its secondary original purpose. So original purpose, containment. But beyond that, the vessel itself is also always used as a storytelling device beyond holding water, oil, wine, things like that in the ancient period. And so in Western art at Swarthmore, I was very interested in the Vanitas paintings that emerged in that survey course. And when I was, I'm just gonna mute everyone because I'm hearing a little feedback. Okay, good. When I was in the Western art class, I was really interested in Vanitas paintings because of their focus on the transience of life, the idea of things being in their prime and then gone, perfect and then dead. It's sort of like the active bell curve we all live. We go up and we go down. And so there was this focus on symbolism that captured that reality, our kind of moral reality as humans. You'll see flowers as representations of things in their prime, perfection, youthful beauty. And then also bees and flies started to really become a core element of the work. At first it was flies, and now it's really only bees. The flies represented death and decay, and the bees represent growth, life, the next generation. And so I'm really interested in continuing to use those art historical tropes in the work that you'll see those continuing from this period to the present. So this is 7 years ago. This work was in my senior thesis. And the gold and the kind of highly rendered detail has always been something that has just been almost like a rule for me. It just has to be in it. But it also is tied to my own sense of aesthetics, the images that I need to see in the world, and then the things that most completely capture both the parts of human life that I'm interested in and my own human experience within what human life looks like today. This is another work from undergrad. This is in the BCC, actually. So fast forward 4 years after I went to China the first time in undergrad for a study abroad program in Jingdezhen, and then I did in 2014 I did my Fulbright at the China Academy of Art in Hangzhou, and then I went to graduate school at UCLA. And so that's fast forwarding a lot since we have 45 minutes. But this is an installation shot from an open studios event that we had at the graduate studios at UCLA. And this is when I started to create environments for the work that supported the work, which really changed the way that I understood what I was making and what I was trying to say with the work. The works themselves in this period are all about different ways of accessing human priorities. They engage with the language of surrealism, the language of dreams, which is ultimately the language of surrealism. But also there's an idea of capturing specific identity politics within our own human needs. The surrealists define human life just by 4 simple categories. They say all we're interested in, or it's between all we're interested in and just what human life is. But they say it's all defined by sex, violence, consumption, and pleasure. And if you look at the world and if you look at your own life, it usually ends up being something like that. So there's a clear interest in these human needs being achieved in the work, but there's also the idea of how those human needs are met as we navigate the world to meet those needs via our own identity politics, or how the world places us within the social system based on our identity politics. It's a lot of social sorting that then says like, well, this is how you're going to get those things. And so, or this is how you feel in the moment. A lot of the work is about getting to these ideas of what is it like to be alive today as a certain person. And so when I move into the work, this piece is called Well, This Is Fine. And a lot of the titles have the narrative element and a little bit of a blasé cynicism as well. Well, this is fine is, this character's not fine. It's a plucked flower placed on a pedestal that's, it's sort of there. He's like, yes, I'm here dying, but like, looks great. And so there's that feeling that we have often of having to be things that we're not, having to be something beyond ourselves. One time a collector told me, nobody really wants you to be what you actually are. Everybody wants you to be what they want you to be. And I think that's very true, but with that comes a real loss of self. And even though you can check the boxes and meet the standards of being the kind of perfect thing that everybody else wants you to be, your society wants you to be, your ought self, if you're into psychology, there's still a pain that comes with that because you're giving up your actual self. And so the flower that's plucked and placed on the pedestal is a representation of that. And this is, if you look here, it's kind of like bleeding a little bit. Everything is bleeding, dripping, crying. There are a lot of, there are a range of bodily fluids that are represented in the work that index to specific situations, but you'll see that as we move through the presentation. It's all about emotion and the experience of emotion. This piece is called Just Another Day, and it's about the competition of graduate school. It was, if I could describe graduate school in one word, it would be violent. If this is any description of, or any representation of what that was like, you can kind of see that. These 2 emoji characters attacking this snake, but the snake is fighting back. Also, there's a lot of chaos, cyclical violence, conflict, but also within that, there's a loveliness and delicacy that comes with the rendering and the flowers that balance that. I was interested in the snake and flower motif actually from a quote by Lady Macbeth, who said, with reference to the role of women in society, which I think is analogous to the role of really anybody who's outside of the majority demographic or the people who benefit most from privileges in America, is that you have to, she says, to be a woman in society, marginalized in society, you have to look as the flower, but be the snake under it. And, I don't necessarily subscribe to social deception in such a way. It's a little pathological, but at the same time, it's true enough, and so a lot of that was going on in graduate school, sneaky, shady, scary people. And there's also this kind of joy. It's like, yep, here it is in capitalism, America, competition. This is just what it is. And so the emojis are, they're kind of taking it in stride. But this is also the first piece that I used that I made that used emojis as a way to express emotion universally. Everybody understands what an emoji is expressing because we all share the same human expressions. It's human expressions by humans as interpreted as humans. So regardless of the language or cultural context, we still know what's happening and the narrative starts to be clear. But the specific narrative in the work is always an access point for a larger universal narrative. This is my MFA thesis at List Gallery at UCLA. And this is where the format of the curation and presentation of the work starts to be less of a hermetic environment that we saw with the Black studio and more of a reference to Western structures. So there's a Beaux-Arts element to this where you're moving through the space. There's a kind of processional format, and the curation is also narrativistic. So it shows us what, like at the beginning, abjection, stereotype imagery, and then forms of love, narcissus here, and a black heart. So black heart is both a darkened heart, but also, skin color, black, it's a black heart. And so we also have, as we move forward, this piece here, it's a snake pit. It looks lovely from the outside, but it's actually filled with these shiny glazed black snakes. And then beyond that, there are two sculptures, you'll see those in more specific detail later, that kind of exude a certain supremacy, and also notice how it's a move toward whiteness as well. I find that as I become more and more involved in society, the higher you go, the wider it gets, we'll say, in most spaces. And ultimately, at the end of this, there is it's a video of kind of the same sculptural formats, but with a lot of phallic imagery, and it's also submerged in water. So this whole sculpture in the back disintegrates actively while you're watching, while you're moving through the space. And so there is a vanitas element to that. The video is called Animate Vanitas. And it shows how like everything is breaking down actively, just like the same ideas of human transience of life, but you're also getting to walk through the space and see a progression ultimately toward the end. This led to my first solo presentation with Gavlat Gallery in Los Angeles. And again, it uses that Beaux-Arts format to speak about aesthetics and kind of these ideas of perfection. And also like it touches on Western perfection, but that perfection will start to take a different perspective in the next show that I'll show you. But in this format, this show was called Wonderland, and it was all about ideas of canonical Western narratives that all serve as parables and analogies for our contemporary experience. And so it's in this presentation, there are ideas from mythology, stories that we're familiar with as part of the Western canon, and also things that are just moments of my own experience. So one way that I've described the work before is that it's an instantiated approach to making meaning. In a way, everything is a moment. This is an instance, this is an instance. Or in another way, it's saying, it's like human life, my human life is like this. It's also like this, it's also like this. And so when we see each of those moments in context, we start to then have a mosaic image of what my human life starts to be, and thus what one piece of human life starts to be. And so I've always described art making and art as kind of a larger mosaic image of human experience, where each artist's practice is a tile, and that makes up the larger picture of what we do just by being alive and what that means. And then in my work, it's like think of it as like a more granular tile in a subcategory. This metaphor is going a little far, but you get it. Okay. I also like for the work to operate almost like an image in its own right. So the sculptures on their own are each a contained narrative that give context to the other narratives that are at play and present in the same space. And I also like for things to be like, you can see it as a totality. There's also a clear millennial underpinning to this. It's like, this is such an Instagram image. And so when we look at this, it's like, oh yeah, here's the whole thing. It's made to be looked at this way. It's not a square format, but this image does fit on Instagram. And so like it was made for that. And so there's a millennial perspective in the work as well. There's also like a real OCD aesthetics going on that I've noticed in a lot of the work. Like I placed all of these things in the gallery, but everything is always, if you look at the work compositionally, there's always a triangle, and here we are again. It's really, it's like a thing that just sort of happens in the work. Even if we look at this triangle, triangle. So I don't know, there are real Renaissance kind of ideas and aesthetics of harmony ingrained in me, probably from the art that I've been interested in, but also ideas of perfectionism within Western society. And so the next show you'll see talks about that a lot more, but I'll show you some more images first. This is called Your Last Meal, and this is a reference to the story of Cleopatra's death. And so, if you're familiar with the narrative, her city was being taken over by Alexander the Great. She was going to go from being queen of one of the most important, powerful empires in the world, and from that to being a captured slave in Athens. She wasn't going to have that. And so what she did was she had her handmaiden put an asp, a poisonous snake, in a bowl of figs. And then she reached into the bowl of figs and her life was ended. And so, and there's also, it's also really beautiful. Imagine perfect, like, ancient period queen kind of passed out or, dead in one of these chambers. It's a really beautiful image, but the work is also, or this piece is also about the idea of what people with the most power, the most influence, the most resources will do to preserve that power or to avoid the fall from power at any cost, even if it's just leaving the world itself. And so if we think about our current social circumstance, we see this a lot. It's not just our current president. If you think about consistently the crazy things that these CEOs do, it's like, okay, all right, wow. And so a lot of the work has to do with the psychosis of capitalism and the psychosis of the demands of Western society as well. Narcissism and supremacy is core to that. This piece is called Leave Me Alone. It's a flower. It's demanding some space from something that it sees as being less than it. And as I learn more about human needs, human priorities, human psychology, and our own social system, the work at first was about, it was a touch of white supremacy and a touch of narcissism. But when I think about it more, it's like it starts to be about people's needs to, one, there's a distance from toxicity, but there's also a way of saying, like, I'm contained, I'm individual, and there's an element of that in our culture, maybe more than an element of that in our culture. I'm an individualist, no thank you. And so a lot of the work that I'm making is a reflection of the things that I see every day, social or even just metaphors for human society that wouldn't otherwise make sense, but you'll see something, or I'll see something during the day and I'm like, that feels like that. And then that's where the image will come from. This piece is called Watching the Mortals. It's a flower that has kind of superseded its own natural space, or its own natural form, and it's looking down on naturalistic flowers. So it's like, I was once a flower, but now I am this like larger than life, not a flower, but how does it feel to be like a real boy, kind of is what it's is what it says. And in a way, it's also there's a touch of um, I guess there's almost like a demeaning gaze from the flower that superseded its form. Like looks kind of vulnerable being being organic. So that's part of the narrative as well. This is a presentation at the Craft Contemporary Museum in Los Angeles. It's their ceramic biennial that they had, and I have 6 works in this, and it's actually on view now, still through January. COVID has extended things a lot, which is great for exposure. The presentation here, again, it's using the environment to enhance the works. I always think of everything as being, it's not just the work, and the pedestal itself is part of the work. The environment is part of the work. Everything completes itself, and the viewer also, of course, completes the narrative with what they bring to it. This is okay. This is my favorite piece I've made, but I'm not supposed to have favorites. But this one, it's called "Excuse Me While I Feel Myself," and it's a peach that's grabbing itself, and you know, most of us know what the peach emoji means in millennial culture. But what one critic described this as, he said, Alex Anderson accesses queer pleasure in the digital space. It's like, well, here we are. And so I've always thought this work was really funny, but it also, for me, was one of the most like complete things that I made. And I was like, oh, it's always felt right to me. Medusa with my head as the kind of foundational element. And this is also where I started to make these wall pieces that they're like friezes that have these kind of crazed faces. People have described them as having both a real pleasure that's expressed, but also like a clear pain in the character itself. Like is it a smile or a grimace? Is it sweating, or is that a texture? Why is the frame a snake? You know, there are a lot of things that make us question what we're seeing in a lot of ways. It's like, this is really nice. No, it's not. This is really scary, but it's not horrific. But there are elements of terror at the same time. And so there's a lot of push and pull, pleasure and pain, repulsion, attraction. I love it, I hate it. I don't know what to do with it is also what I get often. And the complexity of that psychological space and negotiation of dissonance that an aesthetic can create in a person is something that's interesting to me. One thing that came up in graduate school from one of my professors was the work is so perfect that I want space from it because it makes me feel as though it's better than me, and thus there's nothing for me in it. And I think there's an interesting, when I talk about the dissonance that creates, it feels a lot like what happens with, like, why is America scary? You know, like why is Naomi Campbell scary? You know, it's like it's those same kind of feelings, and to put it really simply and almost, you know, a little reductively, but it's the feeling more than you know, I could give you some academic description around psychology, but it's just about, you know, the analogous feeling that creates. This is called Life's Hard, Let's Not Talk About It. And it's a lot about avoidance and the idea of human beings being volatile things that have active triggers. The flame here has a face. If you look at it closely, it's like thrilled to set the bomb off, and the bomb is kind of happily accepting its fate. It's like, oh God, yep, this is gonna happen. Okay, just smile and take it, it's gonna explode. And so there's an element of human instability, there's the emotional aspect, there's the idea of us all having fuses, and knowing that also, you know, eventually we're going to expire. And then beyond that, I always include touches of identity-based imagery. So the large lips are a standard Black stereotype or image of a Black stereotype image under the Western gaze. And so one thing that one time somebody asked me, what are we not seeing in the work? What would I not know without you telling me this? And the answer to that is that what's not immediately apparent is that this is Black art. It doesn't look like what we usually consider to be Black art. My textbook, the Swarthmore textbook actually, the section on Black art was, Black people like to make collages. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I mean, some do, like, but this doesn't look a lot like that. It said collages with earth tones. And so I was like, well, this looks a lot like French imperial porcelains, but within that, there's it gets a little bit layered, and I'll talk more about that as we move toward the French porcelain things. An eggplant, no explanation needed, perhaps. And this is I'll show you some installation shots from my most recent solo exhibition at Gavlat Gallery. This is the new space that they have downtown. There are 35 pieces in this show called Little Black Boy Makes Imperial Porcelains. And here the Beaux-Arts format speaks mostly to the literal structure of white Western imperialism, white supremacy in the West, and even touches of fascism. But the idea behind it all is that it's beautiful. And a lot of the time, Western society hides its violence behind perfection, beauty, and moral ideas and also the idea of beauty capturing or indexing to high morality. It's like, well, what do you mean we're violent? It's so good. Everything's lovely. This looks perfect. Thus it's right. Okay. And so there, the best review, the best quote that captures the ideas from the show is from Artsy magazine, where they said, Alex Anderson uses, what does he say? Alex Anderson points with derision at the way in which white Western society dresses up its violence and fetishism in white porcelain. Well, maybe that's all you need to know from the show. So I'll just show you images. There's a camp element to a lot of the work as well. The period indexes to a lot of the aesthetics of camp. My identity pieces are more specifically Black, Japanese, gay. And if you look at the work, you can see touches of that across the installation, across the works. But knowing those things, you can decide what to see, what to find in it, or maybe it's all three. Sometimes it is. And the format itself, the pink curtains, there's a Fragonard element, there's a Madame de Pompadour element. But the reason I chose to access this period specifically was there are a few reasons. One, the Versailles and this kind of white and gold aesthetic and the Baroque period was also the fin de siècle. And the fin de siècle period was, then it was the end of the Renaissance social conditions as we moved into the modern period. And they were like, oh, the social shifts are happening, the world is over. Well, now we're actually at what people are calling the end of the world in 2020. And so there's an analogy there. There's also the idea of what was happening at their end of the social world. It's do everything, access every pleasure that you can, full hedonism. It's like, if whatever you want to do, you should go do it because it's going to end soon. Luxury, gold, opulence, being as wild as possible, whatever that looked like in the 1800s. And now we have our own version of that in 2020. So that's another element. But I also wanted to use the format to access ideas of what Western power really looks like. So a lot of the Beaux-Arts structures that we see, or sorry, the Beaux-Arts structure that you're seeing in the work here is reflective of the Beaux-Arts architecture we see in Western imperial spaces. So look at Versailles, look at the Uffizi, look at most Florentine palaces and Western European museums. Then look at how that moves into really most spaces that Western power has touched. The White House, well, that has a lot of white and gold in it right now, especially in this moment. There's if you look at, again, Versailles, it's like these all white and gold everything. And it starts to be the aesthetic of what power looks like. It's a little too perfect. It's a little scary. We know that the opulence came from usually the exploitation of Black bodies or brown bodies. And as long as this has existed, as long as that aesthetic has existed, and it also overlaps directly with slavery. And so when we think about all of those things going on, we have the beauty of the Western imperial structures, but we also have the idea that in this time, Black bodies were being, from Africa, were traded to produce sugar, which was then more than anything, traded for status, power, money, and that usually took the form of court porcelains, ceramic objects. And so, how did Western wealth develop? Well, that cycle. There was also an idea of, at that time, every time you eat a pound of sugar, you're eating a certain amount of Black flesh. Well, every time you're buying a court porcelain at that time, you're probably consuming a lot more Black flesh. And so for me, being a little Black boy, and actually I'm very small, I'm a really small person. And so that's another part of it. But I always think of, like, when I walk in spaces, in certain white spaces, the feeling that I have is like, oh, like, hello, little Black boy, like, we see you. And it's like, oh, I know you do. I certainly stand out. And so there's that idea of dissonance that comes with making these things that, in a way, I was never supposed to be making, according to the historical paradigm of what kind of the system would have me doing if they had their way, if it had its way. So now I'll show you some images of specific works and installation. The lighting was also intentionally done with these archways to have kind of the feeling of either, I guess cathedrals also fall in the category of Beaux-Art architecture. So there are those kind of Baroque archways. It's all a complement to like the architectural ideas at that time. We also see a lot of heavy Baroque imagery in contemporary culture. There's a lot of focus on, if you look at Versace, Gucci, it's like a lot of Black and gold snakes. Gucci started doing it like at the same time as I was doing it in graduate school. And I was like, oh no, people are gonna think that I'm just copying this, but it was coincidental. There are a lot of images. It was a big show. Yeah. So this is a leopard. The snakes that I include are always about these ideas of danger, sneaky, shady forces, the thing that's going to get you, and or the snake under the flower. And with that, there's also the idea of moving beyond those things, triumphing over them. And so the leopard here casually licks a paw and stepping on two snakes. It's about, casually defeating your enemies, mostly by being unbothered. A representation of love and the anxiety and the pain and pleasure of that. Lots of hearts. There's a heart shape in the negative space. It's a swan. But then also, when people pull out their hair, kind of a gesture of crazed feeling. When birds get left alone for too long, pull out their feathers. Train wreck, similar ideas. But it's a literal train track. A crash. The flames have faces in them, smiling at the destruction. So there's always in a way, in the work, there tends to be a winner and a loser in the narratives. Again, that happy face, the bomb. There are a lot of imagery and pieces of imagery that also reflect a lot of the anime that I've watched. There's the Japanese element here. If you know like Studio Ghibli, a lot of people say this looks like Calcifer from Howl's Moving Castle. Um, there's also there's a kind of subtle cultural element there of kind of personifying these or giving anthropomorphizing these things that don't otherwise have any kind of human emotion or animation, like a flame, or like you saw in some of the other things, like a bomb with a face. Well, it's like if you feel like this thing and then you ascribe human emotion and features to it, then it's kind of like, well, it really much is that. It is a representation of what we're like, how we feel, but like as an object-oriented surrogate. Candles, same thing, Vanitas imagery. The candlestick is aware of its own demise. The wax is a wax strip, but it's also a tear at the eye. And the flame is barely holding on, like holding onto the wick, trying not to get blown out. This is called disposable light. It's about the exploitation of Black bodies and ideas. Here and then gone, used, burnt up. This is called Love Spell. Not all of the titles matter as much, but this is called Poisson. It's like poisson in French is fish, but it looks like poison, so I made a poison fish. No explanation needed, perhaps. Somebody said that I used the eggplants as punctuation in the exhibitions. This is called A Very Tired Bear. It's again a moment. You know, life is all very exhausting. We do tons of work all the time, professionally, personally. This is a bear with an Adderall on its tongue. This piece is called Stop Cooning, and it always needs a bit of explanation. So coon is always a derogatory term for Black people. From white people to Black people, it's just a standard derogatory term like anything else. But from Black people to Black people, it usually means that somebody is performing some kind of minstrelsy for the benefit, comfort, pleasure, entertainment of a white audience, being the stereotype they want you to be. Kevin Hart, Steve Harvey. You know, I shouldn't name too many people. I shouldn't name anyone, but here we are. They do it. I don't like it. So this is a piece that is about that. When you see someone behaving in such a way, usually it's like you say, "Stop cooning." And so this is me shooting a raccoon with laser beams out of my eyes. It's very like again camp violence. You know, B horror movie kind of feelings, but the idea is I think the ideas are more serious, but the rendering is playful, and I always think of myself as like just being a cartoon anyway. So here we are. Also, this piece was inspired by the Saint Teresa and Ecstasy in the Cornaro Chapel, and the imagery is not the same, but the format and the pose of the raccoon, it's where it came from. There's less of the erotic element that sculpture has, but the penetration element is the same, except for one is with the Cupid's arrow and this one is with laser beams. I always put vessels in the shows today because it's a reminder that the work is ceramic. And so a lot of times when we look at this, people are like, what is this made of? Is this 3D printed? Is it resin? You know, no, but there's, you know, it doesn't look like ceramics as we know it often. There's not a lot of glaze. There's clear glaze, touches of clear glaze, you know, like on like the nose, there's a slight sheen, but really the clear glaze is often a way to highlight small areas and to serve as a base for the gold. But usually it's just kind of this white. I'm moving more into matte black now, but it's usually one of the two. The vessels also allow me to engage with the language of painting more than the language of sculpture. Sculpture is traditionally, or at least, maybe not so much traditionally, but in the modern tradition, white, black, red, white, black with touches of red, monochrome, focused on form. The language of painting, we get gesture, color, imagery that is flat. We're not worrying about the engineering of forms. It's about this direct representation of the same ideas, but using the language of a different artistic format. And again, the secondary purpose of vessels as a storytelling device also comes into play here. This is called Achilles, and this piece is about the vulnerabilities of having a Black body. And so, by simple default of having gone to Swarthmore, we all have a degree of, I would say, extreme privilege, regardless of what we come from or where we might go. And so this piece is about privilege, but it's also about the inherent vulnerability of the limitations of that. And so drawing from the myth of Achilles and his death and creation, this piece is about me being dipped into a metaphorical river Styx of privilege, the gold being a representation of that, the white hand being my mother's white hand. She's Japanese, but pale nonetheless. And so it's dipping me into the, this river Styx of gold. And the idea, though, is still that the Achilles heel is my Blackness. And so there is, it's, if you remember the Harvard professor who was arrested for going into his own house, or more recently, Christian Cooper, bird watching, a dangerous Black man is trying to kill me, it's those same ideas. And he went to Harvard as well. So it's the same ideas that, you can do all of this and still have that vulnerability present, as vulnerable as the mythic hero's heel. This is called Paranoia. It's an actual pear. It's me as a pear, being afraid of being consumed, plucked. So the sweat drop we see on the emoji, there's an anxiety. When we look at the flowers, they each have eyes in them watching the pear. It's literal white gaze. There's the idea of being surveilled. In my studies of China, one of the concepts that came up was the idea that surveillance is a form of censorship in its own right, because you're never going to act as you would when you're not being watched, if you are being watched. And so there's the idea of knowing that everybody's looking, or at least, having been in that experience enough that I often feel that way. Whatever I do might be noticed and scrutinized. There's also the idea of being plucked from life, Black Death spectacle is a thing. Police violence, Amy Cooper. And then there's also the idea of social consumption. Why is it that you want to be friends with me? Did you want a Black friend? Did you want a gay friend, gay best friend? I'm gonna go shopping with you. Is that what you were looking for? Like things like that. Is it something that, why did you want me on that committee? Did you need some representation? Or why did you want to date me? Is there something you heard about the anatomy of Black people that was interesting to you? So there's always the element of like, why is it that you're trying to consume me? And the paranoia that comes with that. Because also it's not all, paranoia is not true. It's a complex. And so it's not necessarily that this is always happening, because it happens enough. I start to see the world that way. And so it starts to be this narrative here is about that idea. The eyes and the flowers, if you were familiar with that scene in Snow White where she's running through the forest, and they're like all of his eyes in the trees and she's really scary, and then she lands at where the dwarves are. It's kind of like that idea, but sometimes navigating the system feels a lot like that. This is called Got Your Nose. It's a cat holding a severed nose. I always thought that was a really violent thing to say to kids. Got your nose. I'm like, oh God. Okay. This is called Spring. It looks really innocuous, but it's not. If you look at this flower, there are two characters here, three really. Character one, a hand, the back of the head. Flower number two, and then there's also a face, eyes, and a mouth watching. So it's this kind of judgmental narrative around people's sexuality, but also it's called spring. It's springtime. What do people do in spring? This is a rabbit, and this is a series of rabbits I made that are about the predator-prey relationship, but also again the idea of people who have marginalized identities in the West being like almost like prey animals, being targets for just kind of, I would call it like there's like a weird pathological targeting that I think people do, and so this is the reversal of that. This is called Sometimes Snakes Are Snacks, and so the rabbit is eating the snake. And this is called Don't Touch My Hair, Hare. And it's like Edward Munch's The Scream. It's like I think everybody probably knows at this point you can't touch Black people's hair, but it's such a thing, you know. It's like, oh, what's that? It's how do you get that texture? Oh my God, like Jamal, I love your hair. Like, can I touch it? How do you do that? Is that natural? And so, you know, there's those elements, but there's the real disgust of that feeling that happens. And so the hand is like dripping with sweat. There's Edward Munch's The Scream. It's like, oh my God, this is happening. And then play on words, don't touch my hair. It's a hair. Another rabbit. I bite the snake's head off, or where it would be, to show the human role in this. So there are human teeth marks, but it is on a rabbit. And it's a little sick. I mean, like the rabbits are all like wearing the snake's like clothes. They're like, oh, like you want to eat me? Well, I'll make you into a jacket. It's like when Beyonce said that she wanted to use Jay-Z's mistress's teeth as confetti. Like that kind of idea. Also, God, who says that? This is a bow. It's just called bow, but it is about the way that we hide, or it's just the way that society hides social violence is behind formality and the appearance of wholesomeness or good behavior. It's like that Beverly Hills, perfect Beverly Hills wife who does like scary things to her maid, psychological violence with her maid, things like that. These are wall pieces that they're mostly emotional and about material joy, but this one is about this is about kind of that mid-20s crazed self-love. The heart literally holds the key to its own heart. There's a figure inside trying to escape but is locked away, and you know, only the heart can unlock itself and release that true self. There are also elements of Dada in this, but surrealism and Dada go hand in hand. But you know, the eye flowers are part of that for sure. And then unlocking oneself. This is a series called Stains on a Pretty Landscape. And it's about the idea of Black people being almost like a detriment on a perfect white ideal. So lovely landscape. It's painted to be, the imagery is lovely, but there's always like kind of a wild chaos in the composition. And then it's both idyllic and a little bit sick at the same time. It's lovely, and then if you look at it a little bit too long, it's like, this is awful. But it's how it is. This is called Look at Ourselves, and it's the form of a mirror, but if you look into it, of course, what you see reflected back to you is a pool of writhing snakes and flowers. So it's about the inherent human darkness and beauty that we all have. What I say about this piece is everyone's done something that was uncool, to say the least. This is called losing face. It's when you forget to code switch. You say something too black or too gay, and it's like, oh God, I've been seen. What happens when the white mask falls off? Well, what's under it? Those raw perceptions of your non-majority, non-normative identity. Oh no, now what? And then these are the most recent works. It's those stains that I was making before, they became ghosts and then they became figures. And so you'll see a range of those things in a few of these works, but also if you follow what I'm doing on social media, you'll see kind of the development of this in the next series of work that I'm making, which is going to start tomorrow at the Archie Gray Foundation. So I'm very excited about that. Thank you. These are small paintings. They're like this big. Happen to have this one next to me. And then this is big. So again, that Baroque format for making a canvas out of clay, but also using the frame as a narrative element in the work. And that's the end of it. I'd love to answer any questions that people have.
Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Normally, I would thank someone for allowing us into their psyche and perhaps their vulnerabilities, but I don't sense any vulnerability from you. So yeah.
No, it just is what it is, basically.
It's all out there for us to see. I wanted to ask these moments that you capture so remarkably. They obviously don't take just a moment to render or to construct and to think through the whole process. So could you maybe help us who are struggling to make things, understand how to capture, whether through sketches at the beginning or, how do you capture one moment?
The best advice. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. The best advice my graduate advisor and mentor told me was, all you have to do to make art is follow your inclinations and make something we've never seen before. And I read an interview in graduate school with one of my favorite painters who also said something similar, and it was a little bit simpler. She said, it's not that hard. All we have to do is express ourselves. And the challenge comes in how you do that. But what I always tell my students is, really don't worry about what anybody else is doing. You already have everything that you need in yourself to make that thing. You just have to trust that it's right and do it. And to make this more Barry Schwartz had a study that said in decision making, good enough is almost always good enough. And which means that every time, if you were to consider that same decision, for however long you think is responsible or necessary, the difference would be negligibly better, if not better, if not better at all. So yes, it's like, is that syntax right? Yeah, so no difference really is the point. And so it's like, you just do it, Nike, just do it. Write it, if you have the idea, write it down so you don't forget. I don't sketch really. I'm very visual. The ideas stick in my head, and that's good and bad. I mean, I don't forget really anything, which is, everything floats around. It's like this, imagine like loop video of your life always replaying. But there's once I have the image in my head, I'm like, oh, that's what I'm gonna make. It's like a slideshow. this image. Okay, I'm gonna do that. Next one, and then next. So I just made like with these paintings, I would just make 4 canvases. They're also all built like canvases. They're like stretcher bars, and so I'll just make like 4 of them, and then or a few of them, like a painter would do, and then you have like your base for those ideas. Then you can just, once you have it, just start. Or if it's going to be a freestanding sculpture, go to the studio before you get tired of that idea. Is what I also say, because it's like, that's so brilliant. I know what I'm going to make, and then it's like, that wasn't cool. Like I'm never going to do it. Like that kind of. So once you have the idea, like run and make it.
That's great advice. Begin. Yes. I have more questions, but I'd like to open it up if anyone else has more thoughts or questions for Alex.
I guess I have a question. I noticed, I think it was in the pear piece and also one of the paintings, a blue tear. And I can't remember if you talked about it or not, but I was sort of wondering what the significance of the blue was there. Yeah.
Like a sweat droplet on the emoji.
Okay, sweat drop.
Yeah, like when you're nervous, or like if you see an anime, like something happens and like the sweat drop appears, like very Pokemon. Yeah.
So maybe while we have this piece up, this is, an intensely personal, I feel like, feeling as you make your way in the world, experiences that you've distilled into this porcelain. And it's brand new. It's nothing any of us have ever seen. Yeah, how do you kind of compose that? How do you get from your thoughts to this? A little about process, I guess.
Yeah, with something like this, the first thing I had to figure out was how to make that branch stand up. And so sometimes the form follows that. So step 1 was, okay, this has to be like this. How will that happen? How big does it have to be? What can it really support? What's realistic? Then this looks weird on its own. This needs a supporting piece of composition that also adds another eye. This is weird with just 2. We'll add another one. So sometimes I have the general idea of what I'm going to make. I knew that basically this image was going to happen. And then I had to find a way to make that work across the whole piece so that it was a cohesive aesthetic and conceptual object. And engineered in such a way that it won't fall apart.
Right, that's the thing. There's so much technical mastery here that I think my beginning students would wonder about how to get to this point. So
it's easier than it looks, I promise.
Anyone else have questions? I have a little noise here, so I'm going to keep myself muted.
Okay. It's okay if you don't have questions. I've been told that I say a lot in the lectures, so like if I try to be clear and like you really give a lot of information when you talk. So maybe that's okay.
And just to kind of change topic a little bit, I'll ask you to speak a little bit about your experiences. I know when you were still at Swarthmore, before your senior year, you went to Penland for part of the summer. Penland School of Crafts is like a summer craft camp for adults. And spent time in Jingdezhen and another program in China. And now you're heading off to Archie Bray, which is a terrific place for residency in Montana. Maybe talk a little bit about how those experiences working in other studios have informed your work.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to Penland, I was 19. So, you know, I thought I was cool for getting to go there, but I really didn't know very much at all. And it was eye-opening to see what other artists were doing with clay, because I had two perspectives on what it could do, what I learned in high school and what I learned in my freshman year at Swarthmore. And so just seeing how other people applied the medium to their own purposes, seeing the potential of the medium really realized with different approaches was helpful to me. That was great at Penland, but that really happened for me in China, where there was I got to just observe masters working in every different style of making. And in China, it's different because in the West, one person does everything, does every part of the process. One person, like you throw, you trim, you glaze, you put your gold luster on yourself. In China, it's one person throws, one person trims. One person is a master at throwing. One person is a master at trimming. One person is a master at glazing and at surface decoration, at rendering bees, at rendering butterflies. And it actually gets that specific. In learning ink painting, it gets specific as well. There's the standard figure painting, landscape painting, and then bird and flower painting. So that's what I studied. And so being able to see just all the different ways that the material can work, what it can do, understanding. I don't think I know everything about it. You know, I think Doug knows everything about it, but about clay. But there's when I think about it, it's like I'm only what you're seeing in the work is a range of the possibilities that I've been able to kind of collect, put together. And so what one person said about the work in grad school was, and this is very true. He was saying that, yeah, like basically what Alex does is all of the intro ceramics techniques, but he just does them really well and then puts it together. Like, so it's like, it's just like, it actually is as simple like as that. It's like, it's nothing really changes. The processes haven't changed ever in the thousands of years of history, but it's just knowing like, oh, I can apply this way. Oh, I can also do this. It's like if you guys do, it's like coding or something, oh, I have this application. I have this one thing, but like that's supposed to do this thing, but you can also apply it in these ways, which can then be applied in these ways. So it's all about understanding the material. For me, mastery of skill was really important. And I don't think, I appreciate the generosity of people saying that I've mastered this, but then, then go to China and you'll see that I haven't. So there's the technical skill is important. The proficiency is important to me because I don't want to be limited in my own ideas by what I can or can't do in myself.
Yes, I very much appreciate that, because you have really made great efforts to educate yourself and to be able to apply these skills that are really critical to what you're producing. You need good skills, and you use them very well. So thank you.
Thank you. I think there's something in the chat. Oh,
Andrea.
Yeah. Can you talk about how you balance your time teaching, making, gallery going when creating forms to use casting? Okay, I cast my head and hands because I want those to be consistent images. Otherwise, no, the bees are all hand sculpted. People ask me that a lot. Nothing's 3D printed. Balance my time teaching, making, gallery going. Well, so teaching is wonderful for a lot of reasons. I mean, I really enjoy it, but also my schedule's really flexible. It's not flexible. It's not heavy, we'll say. Like sometimes I'll teach for 2 hours, but I'll be there at 9, and then I'll have 4 hours in the middle of the day, and then the school will close and I can stay there all night. I don't do anything else. So that's also part of it. You're like, what do you do for fun? Ceramics. Like, what did you do this weekend? Ceramics. Like, do you have any plans for the vacation? you know, like, so it's that's it. There isn't a balance, and that's not, you know, I've been questioning whether that's healthy. One of my friends, he's a weaver. He does textile art, makes these huge tapestries. One of the things that we talk about is, well, is there anything beyond our practices? You know, and the answer we have so far is no. So, like, you know, call it what you will. I believe that while it's gotten me here, I don't think it's healthy to have that as your only thing. But at the same time, I haven't found anything else that's quite as satisfying. So here we are. I used to say I don't care, but now I do. Oh, and then gallery going. So in graduate school, you have to go all the time, all the time. So it would be like, you get to the studio at 10, you work until 5:30, the gallery opening is at 6, but you have to go to 5 of them, and it's LA, so nothing's near each other. So you spend 15 minutes at each gallery, you set a timer on your phone, you leave abruptly at each one. And then like one time I went to 7 openings in 2 hours in 3 different neighborhoods, but you have to do it. Like you have to be like, it's when you're, you know, trying to be what Tony Marsh says, he's professor here at Cal State Long Beach in ceramics. He says, don't be a secret. And so in graduate school, you really can't be a secret. And then eventually, you know, the snowball starts to roll more, and then you're just not a secret. So you don't have to be there all the time. So now I go to the openings that I want to go to, but it's also COVID. So it's not like I can anyway. But, you know, sometimes I miss the joy of, and the, I would call it a pathological thrill of having to do all of that, like, like that game playing in a way. Oh, you came to my show. That's so great. I'm like, yes, I'm here for 10 minutes, but I'm glad you saw me. Like, leave. So, you know, that it's kind of fun. Then when you're 20, 25, 26, 27, at 30, as of Friday, it gets, I know, it gets tiring, but it's also, you know, I think it's all a useful skill, and it's things that you have that I'll have to use forever. You know, it's like I don't have the New York gallery yet, and so I go do that when I'm in New York. Even though it's, you know, it's like it's just trying to learn the landscape and learn who's in it. So once again, no balance, no. It's either in the studio or trying to find places for what's in the studio, for where the things in the studio will go. I really do believe that, like, somebody was like, what's your advice for undergrads, and what's your advice for, you know, recent graduate students? It's like, find all your joy in your practice, only spend your money on that, otherwise save it and put it into stocks because you'll need it. And also, like, if you find all your joy in your practice, well, working is free. So, you know, if you're really, really in it, the way that I saw it before, which was a little bit narrow, but, you know, if you really have only one focus in life, here we are, was that working is free. I don't need to spend my money on anything other than art supplies, gas, and food, and rent. You know, and otherwise, when I was again in my very narrow grad school 26 world, I was like, and why would you anyway? So there's that.
Well, your immersion in the work comes through, absolutely. I mean, this work can't come from someone who's not just in the studio all the time. So
obsessed.
Yeah. It's healthy, I think.
Sure, I'm glad you think so.
And for those students listening in who are working long hours in the studio to finish a project, I think it's helpful for them to recognize that, you know, to really accomplish something, it takes some investment.
Yeah, it's Swarthmore. What I always thought was like, oh, I have to go get everything else done so I can go back to the studio. Like, it's like, and also the other thing was, you don't get A's at Swarthmore. I was like, oh, I have to go get this A- so that I can go back to the studio really fast. I'm only going to do enough to get the A- so that I can go back to the studio, because it would take too long to do the rest, and I need to be in the studio. So
You graduated anyway. That's okay.
yeah, it worked out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fair to say it's working out.
Well, thanks. It's yeah, I always think about my development at Swarthmore and just how wonderful everybody was when I was there. So all of you are part of that experience, and so thank you.
Well, thanks for coming back, Alex. Anyone else have any last minute thoughts or questions for Alex? Can we give him a big thank you? We sure appreciate your time with us. I look forward to having you in person.
Yes.
At some point.
As soon as we
Allows.
can, you know I'm there.
Yes, very well.
Best wishes to you, Alex. It's so
Thank you,
amazing
Andrea.
to see your work, and it's as richly intense and conceptually profound as usual.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
And we can all follow you on Instagram, I take it?
Yeah. It's just I mean, you know, I'm always like not trying to be the person who's like, follow me, but my the Instagram, I'll put it in the chat. It's 100 Alex Anderson. It's just the number 100 and then my name. But then you can see everything I'm making, or shows that are near you.
There it is. Thank you.
Oh, good.
All right, Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me today, Neil. I really appreciate it.
It's been a great gift to us. So I really am grateful for your time, and wish you all the best at Archie Bray.
Thank you. It's gonna be so much fun. I can't wait.
Warm clothes. It's Montana.
All right. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Take good care now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. So Andrea, I missed a little bit of recording some of your introduction, but yeah. So, but I got the rest of it. So I'll send you that recording.
No worries. I just want to say this was